where faith, inspiration, and storytelling come together to bring the Bible to life like never before. Our mission is to take you on a spiritual journey through the Bible's stories, from the creation in Genesis to the revelations of the end times. Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys.
Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys. Here we dive deep into the fascinating stories of the Bible, uncovering their hidden meanings and timeless wisdom. Whether you're a believer seeking deeper understanding, or simply curious about the historical and spiritual significance of biblical narratives, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to leave a comment below. Now, let's embark on today's journey, one that is filled with faith, sacrifice, and divine intervention. It is a story of a mother and son cast out into the wilderness, left to survive on their own, yet never truly abandoned. Today we explore the question, why were Hagar and Ishmael banished? The story of Hagar and Ishmael's banishment is one of the most powerful and emotionally charged moments in the book of Genesis. It's a story of human conflict, divine promises, and the struggle between fate and free will. At its core, it speaks to universal themes: rejection, survival, and ultimately redemption. But this isn't just an ancient tale. It holds deep meaning for us today. Have you ever felt cast aside, forgotten, pushed out of a place where you once belonged? Hagar and Ishmael's journey through the wilderness is more than just history. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering presence of God, even in the darkest moments. To truly understand why Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, we need to go back to the beginning. Abraham, a man chosen by God, was given a remarkable promise. He would be the father of many nations. But there was one problem. His wife Sarah was barren. Years passed, and still they had no child. In her desperation, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She offered her Egyptian maidservant Hagar to Abraham as a concubine, hoping that through her he might have an heir. And so Hagar conceived and bore a son, Ishmael. For a time, Ishmael was Abraham's only son, the presumed heir to his great legacy. But then, something unexpected happened. In her old age, long after she had given up hope, Sarah miraculously gave birth to a son, Isaac. What began as a household solution quickly turned into a household conflict. 2 women, 2 sons, 1 inheritance, and rising tensions that would change the course of history. As we unravel this story, we'll explore not only the immediate reasons behind Hagar and Ishmael's banishment, but also the deeper significance behind this event. Was it simply an act of jealousy and rivalry, or was it part of a divine plan that extended far beyond what Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar could comprehend? This story is about more than just an ancient dispute. It's about God's justice, His mercy, and His ability to turn even the most painful moments into something greater. So, stay with us as we journey through this incredible narrative. By the end of this video, you might just see this story, and perhaps even your own life, in a whole new light. The beginning of the conflict. To understand why Hagar and Ishmael were banished, we must first look at the intricate family dynamics that set the stage for this dramatic event. The story unfolds in the household of Abraham, a man chosen by God to be the father of many nations. But before that promise could be fulfilled, Abraham and his wife Sarah faced an obstacle that seemed impossible to overcome. Sarah was barren. At this point in their lives, Abraham and Sarah had waited decades for a child. God had promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars, yet no heir had been born. As time passed, Sarah grew impatient. In an attempt to take control of the situation, she devised a plan, one that was not uncommon in ancient cultures. Sarah offered her Egyptian maidservant Hagar to Abraham as a concubine. The logic was simple. If Sarah could not bear children herself, perhaps Hagar could bear a son on her behalf. In those times, it was an accepted practice for a barren wife to present a servant as a surrogate to secure an heir for the family. And so, with Sarah's consent, Abraham took Hagar, and soon she conceived a child. The plan appeared successful. Abraham now had a son. Ishmael was born, and for a time, it seemed that he would be Abraham's heir. But with Ishmael's birth came an unexpected shift in the household's power dynamic. As soon as Hagar became pregnant, the relationship between her and Sarah changed. Genesis 16 verse 4 tells us that when Hagar saw she had conceived, she looked with contempt upon her mistress. This reaction suggests that Hagar, now the mother of Abraham's only child, may have felt elevated in status, perhaps even superior to Sarah, who remained barren. Sarah in turn became resentful, feeling displaced in her own home. Sarah's frustration grew when she complained to Abraham, blaming him for the discord. In response, Abraham gave Sarah full authority over Hagar, and Sarah treated her so harshly that Hagar fled into the wilderness. It was in this moment of despair that an angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar. The angel comforted her, instructed her to return to Sarah, and gave her a prophecy about Ishmael's future. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Genesis 16:12. Hagar returned to Abraham's household and gave birth to Ishmael, who grew up as the only son of Abraham. For 13 years, Ishmael was presumed to be Abraham's heir. Then, everything changed. When Abraham was 99 years old, God reaffirmed his covenant, but with a crucial clarification. Sarah would bear a son. This child, Isaac, would be the one through whom God's promises would be fulfilled. This declaration must have been shocking, not only because of Sarah's advanced age, but also because it shifted the expectations for Ishmael's future. True to God's word, Sarah gave birth to Isaac a year later. What should have been a moment of pure joy for the family became the catalyst for conflict. Now there were two sons, one born from Sarah, the other from Hagar. One was the son of divine promise, the other the son of human intervention. The existence of two heirs created an inevitable power struggle. Would Ishmael, as the firstborn, inherit Abraham's legacy, or would Isaac, as the child of promise, take his place? The answer to this question would lead to one of the most heartbreaking moments in Abraham's life: the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael. From this point forward, tensions would only escalate, leading to a decision that would change the course of history forever. What caused the banishment? The conflict between Sarah and Hagar had been simmering for years, but the moment that sealed Hagar and Ishmael's fate came unexpectedly, during what should have been a joyful family gathering. The pivotal event takes place in Genesis 21:8-10, shortly after Isaac, the long-awaited child of promise, was born. As was custom in ancient times, a great feast was held to celebrate Isaac's weaning, typically when a child was around 2 or 3 years old. This was more than just a milestone in Isaac's life. It was a public affirmation of his position in the family. It was during this feast that Sarah noticed something unsettling. Genesis 21:9 states that Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. At first glance, this may seem like a minor detail. Why would a child laughing or playing be so significant? The answer lies in the interpretation of the Hebrew word used here. Some translations render it simply as laughing, while others suggest it could imply mockery or ridicule. Scholars debate whether Ishmael was merely engaging in childlike play, or if he was teasing, challenging, or even threatening Isaac's place as Abraham's heir. Regardless of the exact nature of Ishmael's actions, one thing is clear: Sarah perceived it as a threat. In her eyes, Ishmael was not just a boy playing, he was the son of another woman, a rival to her own son's inheritance. And she was not about to let that stand. What happens next is one of the most emotionally charged moments in the story. Sarah turns to Abraham and issues a direct command. "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Genesis 21:10. Notice Sarah's choice of words. She doesn't refer to Hagar by name. She calls her this slave woman. The language is harsh, distancing, even dehumanizing. This wasn't just about personal resentment. It was about securing Isaac's future as the undisputed heir. In ancient Near Eastern culture, the firstborn son traditionally held a special place in inheritance rights, even if he was born to a concubine. Ishmael, as Abraham's firstborn, could have had a legitimate claim to a portion of Abraham's legacy. Sarah's demand ensured that Isaac would have no competition. Abraham was deeply distressed by Sarah's demand. Ishmael was his son, his flesh and blood. Sending him away would mean severing a bond that had lasted for over a decade. But then God spoke, and his words changed everything. "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." Genesis 21:12-13. God's response was both painful and reassuring. He confirmed that Isaac was indeed the chosen heir, the one through whom God's covenant would be fulfilled. But at the same time, he made a promise. Ishmael would not be forgotten. He too would become the father of a great nation. With God's reassurance, Abraham made the heart-wrenching decision. Early the next morning, he gave Hagar and Ishmael a small ration of bread and water and sent them away into the wilderness. From a human perspective, this moment seems tragic. An elderly father forced to let go of his son, a mother and child abandoned to an uncertain fate. But from a divine perspective, it was part of a much greater plan. Little did they know, their journey into the wilderness was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. A father torn. Abraham stood at a crossroads. On one side, his beloved wife Sarah, the mother of the promised child, was demanding the removal of Hagar and Ishmael. On the other, his firstborn son, his flesh and blood, was at risk of being cast out into the wilderness with no clear future. It was a heartbreaking dilemma that no father would ever want to face. Abraham had a deep love for Ishmael. For over 13 years, Ishmael had been his only son. He had watched him grow from infancy into adolescence, teaching him the ways of life, guiding him as a father should. In Abraham's eyes, Ishmael was not just the son of a servant. He was his son, period. Yet Sarah was unwavering in her demand. "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Genesis 21:10. Abraham must have felt torn between his duty as a husband and his love as a father. Should he risk his relationship with Sarah by refusing her demand? Or should he send away his own son and trust that God had a plan? The cultural context of the time only made this decision more difficult. In ancient Near Eastern traditions, the firstborn son typically held significant status in matters of inheritance. Even if he was the son of a concubine, Ishmael had a rightful claim to at least part of Abraham's legacy. By sending him away, Abraham was not only removing Ishmael from his household, but also stripping him of any future role in his inheritance. Furthermore, this wasn't just a matter of sending Ishmael to another household. He was being sent into the wilderness, where survival was uncertain. Would he have enough food and water? Would Hagar be able to care for him alone? Would Ishmael resent Abraham forever for what seemed like an act of abandonment? These questions must have tormented Abraham. His heart was breaking. But then, something happened that changed everything. In the midst of Abraham's sorrow, God spoke to him with words that, though painful, offered divine clarity. Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. Genesis 21, 12-13. God's words carried a profound message. First, they confirmed that Isaac was indeed the chosen heir, the one through whom the covenant would be fulfilled. But at the same time, God did not disregard Ishmael. He assured Abraham that Ishmael too had a destiny. Though he would not inherit Abraham's covenantal promise, he would become the father of a great nation in his own right. This promise must have given Abraham some comfort. Though he had to make a painful choice, it was not an act of rejection. It was part of a larger divine plan that he could not yet fully comprehend. With a heavy heart, Abraham prepared for the inevitable. He rose early in the morning, took a skin of water and some bread, and gave them to Hagar. He placed the provisions on her shoulder, took one last look at Ishmael, and sent them away. There are no recorded words of farewell between Abraham and Ishmael. No embrace, no parting blessing, just silence. One can only imagine the pain in Abraham's heart as he watched them walk away, disappearing into the vast wilderness of Beersheba. Did Ishmael look back? Did he wonder why his father had let him go? We do not know. But what we do know is that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Ishmael, but for the fulfillment of God's promises to both of Abraham's sons. As Hagar and Ishmael vanished into the desert, Abraham was left standing, knowing he had done what God commanded. And now, all he could do was trust that God's plan for Ishmael would unfold, just as it had for Isaac. Divine intervention. A promise fulfilled. Hagar sat in the wilderness, her body weak, her heart shattered. Ishmael, her beloved son, lay under the shade of a bush, barely clinging to life. The desert stretched endlessly before them, offering no hope, no escape, only silence and despair. She had done all she could. The water was gone. The strength to keep walking had left them. And so, in her final act of heartbreak, she distanced herself from Ishmael, unable to watch him die. With tears streaming down her face, she cried out in anguish. But in that moment, when all seemed lost, God intervened. God hears the cry of the abandoned. The Bible tells us in Genesis 21:17, "And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, 'What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is.'" This passage is striking. It wasn't just Hagar's weeping that moved heaven, it was Ishmael's. Though he had been cast out from Abraham's household, God had not turned his back on him. Even in the wilderness, even in suffering, Ishmael's cries reached the ears of the Almighty. The angel's voice pierced through Hagar's sorrow, delivering a message of hope. "Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 21:18. It was the same promise God had given to Abraham years before. Ishmael was not destined to perish. He was destined to thrive. Then something incredible happened. Genesis 21:19 says, "Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink." The well, right there in the desert. Had it been there all along, unseen in her grief? Or had it miraculously appeared at that very moment? The Bible does not say, but what we do know is this: when Hagar thought all was lost, God provided. She rushed to fill her water skin and brought it to Ishmael. He drank, his strength returning. What had seemed like a certain death became a moment of deliverance. The wilderness, once a place of suffering, became a place of survival. From that moment on, Ishmael's life took a new direction. The Bible tells us, "And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow." Genesis 21:20. Ishmael did not return to Abraham's household. He did not live under the shadow of Isaac. Instead, he found his own path. He became a skilled archer, a survivor of the desert, a leader in his own right. Later, Hagar found him a wife from Egypt, and Ishmael's descendants multiplied, just as God had promised. Many believe that Ishmael became the forefather of the Arab nations, his legacy continuing for generations to come. What can we learn from this divine intervention? 1. God hears the cries of the forsaken. Even when it seems like no one is listening, God is near. 2. What looks like the end is often just the beginning. The wilderness was not Ishmael's grave. It was his proving ground. 3. God's plans are bigger than human expectations. Ishmael was not the heir of the covenant, but he was still chosen for a great purpose. Hagar and Ishmael's journey began with rejection, but it ended with divine provision. They had been cast out, but not forgotten. And in the wilderness, where hope seemed impossible, God made a way. What can we learn? The story of Hagar and Ishmael's banishment is more than just a tale of survival. It is a profound lesson about faith, resilience, and divine purpose. Beneath the historical and theological layers, this narrative speaks to struggles we all face: rejection, uncertainty, and the search for belonging. So what can we learn from their journey? 1. God hears the cry of the abandoned. One of the most powerful moments in the story is when God hears Ishmael's cry in the wilderness. "And God heard the voice of the boy. Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Genesis 21:17. This is a reminder that God is attentive to the cries of those who feel cast aside. Have you ever felt abandoned, forgotten by those you trusted? Like Hagar and Ishmael, many of us have faced moments of deep isolation. But this story reassures us. God is near, even when we feel alone. He hears us, even when we think no one is listening. 2. Rejection does not mean worthlessness. Ishmael was not chosen as the heir of Abraham's covenant, but that did not mean he was insignificant. In fact, God still had a grand plan for him. "And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." Genesis 21:13. Life often brings rejection, whether from relationships, careers, or personal dreams. But rejection does not determine our worth. Just as Ishmael was given a new path, we too can find purpose beyond the doors that close on us. Sometimes, rejection is not an end, it is a redirection. 3. The wilderness is a place of transformation. For Hagar and Ishmael, the wilderness was a place of suffering, but it was also where they encountered God's provision. What seemed like the end of their journey became the beginning of a new destiny. Many times, life places us in our own wilderness, seasons of hardship, loss, or uncertainty. But just as God provided a well for Hagar and Ishmael, He provides for us too. Sometimes, we just need to open our eyes to see the blessings that are already there. Or, God's plans are bigger than human expectations. Sarah wanted to secure Isaac's inheritance by removing Ishmael, but God had already ordained Ishmael's future. Though Ishmael was not the son of the covenant, he was still blessed beyond what anyone could have foreseen. This teaches us that God's plans are greater than human schemes. What may seem like an unfair loss or injustice in the moment may actually be the beginning of something greater. 5. Faith requires letting go. Abraham's decision to send Ishmael away was painful, yet he trusted God's promise. He could not control Ishmael's future, but he believed that God had a plan. We too face moments where we must let go of people, dreams, or situations we desperately want to hold on to. But faith means trusting that God's hands are stronger than ours. When we surrender, we allow His purpose to unfold in ways we never imagined. A story that still speaks today. The story of Hagar and Ishmael is one of heartbreak, but also of hope. It reminds us that God is present in our pain, that rejection is not the end, and that even in the wilderness, a new beginning awaits. So, what about you? Have you ever faced a moment of rejection or uncertainty? Remember, your story isn't over. Just like Ishmael, your future may be far greater than you ever expected. What do you think of Hagar and Ishmael's story? Do you see parallels in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through the Bible, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode of Timeless Bible Journeys. Until next time, stay blessed, stay curious, and keep seeking truth.